Previously on Donkey Kong Country.
You will go to the Dagobah system.
Dagobah system.
There you will learn from Yoda.
And now, American capitalism. Hello everybody! CSF Watson back again, and welcome to another episode of Retro Replay. Last time I talked a lot about my experiences with the winter as we explored the winter world of World 4. Now we're moving on to World 5, which is mostly just factories and oil mining. Okay, I seriously need to look this up. Why is there oil mining in Donkey Kong's island if he and his family are the only ones there? Is the implication that the Kremlings also live here, so they try to exploit the resources, or the Kremlings invaded months ago and have been slowly but surely taking over the island, and Donkey Kong didn't care until K. Rool decided to steal his bananas? I feel like this is way too much thinking for a Donkey Kong game. Anywho, we move on to a new unique type of stage, that being specifically the factory stage. I never really worked in a factory myself. The closest I ever got was when I worked at a Meijer for about 6 to 9 months. For those who don't know, a Meijer is basically a Midwestern version of Walmart. Oh, of course I forgot. I decided to give up a life because I didn't want to rewind, but I also wanted to go back and get this secret room. Yeah, I'm totally smart. Back to Meijer though. I started working in the electronics department, and then after the Christmas season, I started working in the general merchandise department. But a thing about the time frame was that I initially started working in the electronics department in December of 2019. And then I moved to the general merchandise section in January of 2020. It's absolutely crazy. It was only 3 years ago when it first broke out, but it feels like it was forever ago. That entire year felt like space was warped and time was bendable. Just like I forgot where Rambi was and lost another life. I'll try that again though. Getting back to Meijer, working there during the first initial outbreak of COVID was such a surreal experience. Not just because of the virus itself, but also because of how people reacted to it. A day after the first case had appeared in Ohio, and things were starting to get ready to shut down, everybody was just clamoring through the grocery section. The entire general merchandise section, save for the pharmacy area, was practically dead. I was shocked that I never caught COVID once until I found my next job working remote in September of that same year. But the main reason I equated working there to the factory setting here, even though they are very different settings, working in the back rooms of a box store like that one is a very unique experience, especially working mostly on the general merchandise side like I did. Since grocery was a more highly demanded product even during normal times, all the trucks would drop off their shipments towards the grocery section. Any items that needed to go to general merchandise, we would have to go down there for and bring back on pallets to either store in the walls, put on little service carts, or put onto the floor immediately. Due to this, the general merchandise section felt a bit more stagnant compared to grocery. Grocery had stuff moving around constantly because you always had to put fresh food back on the shelves. In general merchandise, our craziest times were whenever we had to do inventory for corporate, and even then that was a bit of a trick. When grocery had their inventory to do, obviously they had some non-perishables in the back that they had on pallets that required a lot of counting. Due to this gargantuan nature of grocery inventory, we in general merchandise were tasked to go and help grocery with elements of their inventory. But for general merchandise, grocery obviously makes up the vast majority of products sold by Meijer at the time, but the second most product in terms of sheer volume were pet supplies. Pet food, pet toys, pet medicine, this, that, the other. And it was so big it took up about darn near an entire third of our back wall of general merchandise. And for that inventory, we had 2 members of GM able to do inventory, and nobody from grocery ever came over to help us. Keep in mind, this was one of the largest sellers in Meijer's inventory, and they said 2 people was probably enough. And it made even less sense after COVID broke out because anytime we did inventory, we only had a few people. On the one hand, it makes sense because you don't want too many people congregated together to spread the virus when the vaccine wasn't ready yet. But on the other hand, it's only like 1 or 2 people trying to conquer a mountain of stuff, and it's not exactly easy. But that's just in terms of the work environment. Another thing that made it feel more like that dark, dank factory was how the lighting was situated for the break room when COVID broke out. We had a small break room just off to the side that was pretty well lit, looked like your generic office break room, had a little TV, had some vending machines, nothing too crazy, but it only had a few tables that a lot of people would sit around. Can't exactly do that during the early days with COVID. So, since we didn't have any reason to have our single-seater tables out by our bakery and deli for the general customers, people took those tables back to the back room and placed them out spaced apart for people to sit at outside the break room. It made sense for COVID, but it definitely didn't help with the general poorly lit area vibe, especially when you're on break. Instead of a warm, inviting space where you can sit around with your coworkers, we had to sit in this grayish, poorly lit back room surrounded by products we needed to get back out onto the floor as soon as we were done with said break, and it was just definitely a weird experience. I remember most of the time I would just talk to some of my friends while we were on break from across the tables, just trying to strike a conversation. It just never did feel proper. Instead of having a congregation around you that could all pop in and chime into the conversation, I had to share a conversation with the people who were in direct line with my other tables. And if somebody on the far side of the room tried to pipe up, I couldn't hear them because, well, at that point, given the general social distancing rules, that would probably be about 30 odd feet away from me. And given the fact that I have an audio processing disorder, that doesn't exactly make situations great for me. But it was neither here or there. I still had a few good conversations and was at least able to somewhat alleviate some of the trials of that period of time. And I've been talking about that for so long that we've now reached this stage, which is a track stage on a treadmill or something. I'm not entirely sure what this is. It kind of reminds me of those moving sidewalks that you would see at airports and a few other places here and there. I always thought they were really cool when I was a kid because, let's be real, I was a kid and anything that wasn't something I had seen before I automatically thought was cool. Columbus doesn't have any, but obviously there are quite a few airports that have a lot of them. The main one that I can think of was years ago, my family was coming back from a trip from Colorado and we had a layover in Chicago O'Hare. Well, not really a layover, we landed late and then we had to run across the entire airport to try and catch our flight. And we ended up missing it, but thankfully it wasn't the end of the day, so we had one more flight that we could board to get back home. I bring this up because connecting, I believe, the different terminals, and I'm not sure if it's still there or not, it could have been removed in some of the remodels it's done over the years, but there was this one section of an absolute ton of moving sidewalks that was lit only by these weird neon colored lights, not even like fluorescents. It was a really strange sort of experience. And that was just in one section. Compare my experience at the Denver International Airport. That's got a moving sidewalk just about every hallway and every terminal. When I visited Colorado Springs this past October, I flew out of the Springs and then had a 6-hour layover in Denver, and I decided I wanted to kill some time by getting a walk-in. But I made a point to not take the moving sidewalks that trip and just do a full lap around the concourse just using the power of my own 2 feet without being propelled. And that turned out to be a slightly more difficult task than I initially thought. Normally when I visited Denver, there were only 2 different wings of the terminal that you could go down, and they both went down the same amount of distance. But for this trip, apparently they've been doing some renovation and expansion, so when I reached the area that normally would have been the end of the old terminal, I found that if I kept walking, there was even more terminal now. And it looked so drastically different from the rest of the old terminal. I get that's a part of the process, but at the same time, I was just really surprised when I first saw it, and also really impressed at the architecture and general design. Very modern, very clean, very nice. Which makes sense, as this was brand new construction as opposed to updating old construction. Almost makes me wish that the Columbus airport would get a similar treatment and maybe an expansion to help with the growing city. Maybe not, who knows. But we finally cleared this level, and we're off to the 3rd level of this world, that being Elevator Antics. I don't entirely understand why it's called Elevator Antics. I get that there are elevator platforms later on in the stage, but they don't really pop up until the last third, at best. Maybe the halfway point. Unless these ropes throughout the stage are supposed to be the elevators early on. If that were the case, then most of the jungle rope stages would have been called elevator stages. I digress. There was one fall where I was in marching band and I couldn't participate in both the 48-hour film festivals for that year, which was a bummer, but I did need to be there for marching band for the sake of my grades. And my friends made a film called The Elevator Button Door Conspiracy. We had a really bad habit of drawing nothing but documentaries on a regular basis. It got so bad that I think after the third time we drew documentary in 4 48-hour film festivals, the officers of the film club said, yeah, if you guys draw a documentary again, we are going to have you guys redraw and keep that one out specifically for you guys because this is ridiculous. For those who don't know, the way that 48-hour film festivals worked, at least at Bowling Green, each team registered with the officers so that they knew how many teams were participating, how many films to expect once everything was said and done, and by knowing how many teams there were and how many movies there were going to potentially be, they could then set a film duration limit so that films would not drag on too long and make the event of the screening the Wednesday after the weekend not last more than a few hours. But for this particular one, my friends went around to every building on campus that had elevators that they could access. There were a few dorm buildings that had elevators but they couldn't get to because, well, they didn't have key fobs to get inside for security reasons. And then they would test to see if the open and close buttons actually improved the speed of which an elevator door would close, or if just leaving it be without pressing the buttons was actually faster or not, or if it was about the same. It was mostly just another documentary movie that the team made because, like I said, we kept drawing documentaries forever, and I only got to see it after my marching band event was over. I was kind of bummed I missed out. It was just seemed like it would have been a fun time to hang out with my friends, but at the same time, it was just another documentary, and we were starting to get sick of drawing them. There was one time that we drew a documentary and decided to make a mockumentary instead of a true documentary. We finished making that film before 24 hours was up. It was kind of insane. And I'm not just talking about filming. I mean the whole thing. Writing, filming, and editing. It wasn't the best thing we'd ever made, but it was a funny movie. We had a fun time making it. We enjoyed spending time with our friends together on a weekend, and we were just having a fun time making movies. One of my film professor's favorite things to say was whenever you were on set and you were getting tired and it was just like, oof, I don't know how much further I can keep going, he would always say, making movies, living the dream. And some of my classmates would also echo him on that sometimes as we kept going on during productions. I only got to work with this particular professor, Professor Ostrowski, for one project, and that was the studio experience that the school offered during my last semester of college. But I did have a few classes with him. The first class I officially had with him was the Film 1 and Film 2 classes respectively. They were sort of intertwined because the main project for the first class was that you made a movie using a camera using 16mm film. And then Film 2 was the class where you edited said project. And then after that, I can't remember I had 1 or 2 more classes with him. I know I had at least one, where it was the senior portfolio class where we went over resumes, films we had made, how best to present ourselves to companies, things of that nature. But speaking of presentation, now I remember this was the water level that completely and utterly destroyed me. Which is kind of insane. It's a platformer. I should learn from my mistakes. But this isn't a Kingdom Hearts boss. This isn't I'm just trying to go in guns a-blazing, hit the thing until it dies and I just keep dying because I'm under-leveled. This is the same positives and negatives that both characters have one hit before they're out. And that's about it. What the heck? When I was younger, it made sense. I was bad at games, but now I've been in Kingdom Hearts 3 on critical mode without using the Koopa coin or meals, and I can't freaking beat this level? I think this was the level that I initially thought was going to be the long montage of deaths a few episodes ago. Space was warped and time is bendable because clearly my brain thought, oh, I did it earlier instead of later, instead of the obvious answer of later. I'm not entirely sure why. For the most part, I think I just got kinda greedy, like we see here with losing Diddy. I just kept thinking like, there's gotta be a secret here. Nope, there's gotta be a secret here. Nope. And because of that, I just kept dying and dying and dying over and over again. That greediness sometimes bleeds into other games for me, especially if I play Mario, or sometimes if I play Kingdom Hearts, I feel like I want to go for the style attack, but then it ends up costing me my life, so then it creates a bit of an issue. Well, I think we're about there now, so there's the death number 1. And here we go. Like I said, it was pretty bad. But with that, we can finally cut ahead to the winning run. I forget exactly how far I got before one of my deaths, so I just decided to forget. Here's a montage, here's the ending. I finally beat the level, whoop-de-doo, Kalamazoo. All these swimming levels, and I never really talked about experiences at pools or anything like that. And maybe when I finally get to Mario. Okay, now I'm certain I finally finished all the swimming levels in this game. Get past these fish, get past these enemies, because goodness forbid I just want the stage to end. Please, Diddy, please. Okay, that was the last one. We are through. Gosh dang it, finally. But we actually have something neat coming up. The second of 2 minecart levels. I didn't actually know that there was a second minecart level until I played it for the first time when I beat the game on the Wii Virtual Console years ago. I talked about a bit during my second episode how I equated this level with my love of Thomas the Tank Engine because it was on train tracks, so I equated it to trains automatically. Sometimes on my Thomas sets I would even say like, ooh, I'm playing Donkey Kong, even though I wasn't actually playing Donkey Kong. Like I had mentioned, we had a ton of Thomas the Tank Engine toys, and to play with them on, we had this big little table that we would build track routes on, and then either try to reenact our favorite Thomas the Tank Engine VHS episodes, or even Thomas the Tank Engine computer games that we had when we were little. There were 2 that I remember that we had specifically. Trouble on the Rails and Thomas's Magical Railway Adventure or something like that. The first one was just a general adventure game where James had a crash and then you're trying to help him get everything back so that he can run again. But the Railway Adventure is the one I have the most memories of, or rather the most nostalgic memories of because of the little toy that went over the keyboard whenever I played the game. It was one of those old 90s computer toys that you strap to a keyboard and then by moving certain items on the toy, it would press certain buttons on the keyboard. You mostly went around the island of Sodor doing random tasks and mini games here and there, but I always went back to the birdie race minigame because I loved the episode where the 2 of them raced, and since I was also a big fan of that old Speed Racer VHS like I mentioned in episode 2, I was like, ooh, I'm racing as Thomas, so it's similar to Speed Racer, haha. It was a little kid's game, so there wasn't really a true objective to complete it or anything like that. It was just a lot of fun for a kid who saw something that had the image of something he liked and was like, can I have that please? And there was one time I did do that, not necessarily for a particular toy or item, but for an experience. Whenever we would go up to visit my great-grandfather in Akron, we would sometimes stop by the Quaker Oats Hotel and stop by some of the shops they had there, some of which had Thomas the Tank Engine toys, so little me was enthralled. But there was one trip where I noticed an interesting flyer. There was an in-person experience to quote-unquote meet Thomas the Tank Engine happening in Akron, not long from when I first saw that flyer. I was absolutely excited. It's called A Day Out with Thomas, and as far as I can tell, it still runs to this day. It's mostly just a train hooked up to a couple of passenger cars, and when I did it several years ago, it was on a train track pretty out of the way. I don't think it was connected to any major lines, or if it was, they didn't go too far, because the train went backwards a little bit, and then pulled forward into the station again. Of course, the train wasn't the only attraction. It was the main attraction to be sure, but there was some other stuff here and there as well. There were a few tents with meet and greets with characters like Sir Topham Hatt, little model train sets, and just different things around. I don't remember much of it because, again, I was really little. I know that my mom had an old home video of that day when we visited, but I don't know if she has it anymore. And even then, I probably would barely even recognize the setting because my memory is so ingrained with what I think happened, but at the same time, I know that if I look back at that footage again, I'd be like, oh, I don't remember that, I don't remember that, I don't remember that. But there are 2 things that have been practically ingrained in my memory. The first being when I saw the live-action Thomas for the first time, and just being completely enthralled. The second thing was the last scene of that particular home video. After the trip was done, we got on the road to go back home to Columbus, and from there, my brother and I both fell asleep, which resulted in a pretty cute little image of the 2 of us tuckered out in our car seats as we made our way back to Columbus. But the one thing that my brain sometimes takes away from that trip, which is kind of crazy, is the fact that I feel so bad now because I would sometimes wake up really early, my folks would still be asleep, and I would walk into their bedroom and say like, what if we did this? We could go do this. You can do this, and this. And I just hold up the flyer saying like, can we do this? Can we do this? When they probably already had plans to do it, but I just kept annoying them. It's just like, especially now that I've worked a full-time job, I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do to my parents? I hope to one day have kids, but I fully expect and anticipate the day that I text my parents complaining about how my kids kept me up. They will reply with a meme from Thor 3 with Loki screaming, yes, that's how it feels. And I expect nothing less. But with that, we've finally reached the boss for this world, and it's kind of unique, but also not really. It's not a boss that you fight like the ones we have before. It's more an obstacle that you need to avoid as it dumps normal generic enemies at you. This one can be tricky because towards the end it will drop the super heavy roller skating Kremlings, and if you don't have Donkey Kong, I don't think Diddy can kill them, so then you're forced to give up and try again with Donkey Kong. A small part of me wants to try and experiment and see if maybe barrels will spawn so that Diddy can actually beat these guys, but I'm not that adventurous, and I already got through them with Donkey Kong, so let's just dodge this guy a few more times. I'm kind of surprised that the heavy guys aren't the last ones. These armadillos can be killed by Diddy. It would take 2 jumps granted, but they can be defeated. And now that we have successfully jumped on a few enemies from the rest of the world, we have completed World 5. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. I believe the next episode is going to be our finale. So I will see you guys next time. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.